Thanks. Commissioner Jones,
Here.
Okay.
Commissioner Lark. Commissioner Lark. Commissioner Rogers,
Here.
Commissioner Ruddy, Commissioner Sweeney,
Here.
back to Commissioner DeBonda. I can see him on the screen, Mr. Chair. All right. Commissioner Egloff. Commissioner Egloff. Commissioner Lark. Commissioner Lark. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum with two not on yet.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Good morning, everybody. The special workshop meeting here this morning, and just to note that there will not be any administrative action this morning. That will occur this afternoon at 2:00 at a public meeting specifically for the 24-25 budget. But I'll note for the record that this meeting was privately advertised in accordance with the Sunshine Act. By way of notice, the commission conducted an executive session in which staff provided the 24-25 proposed budget information to the commission. There was no administrative action taken at that time either. So with that, I'll just ask again, since we're hybrid here, to be aware as you speak to please identify yourself so the stenographer can capture that appropriately. It's as we all know, it can be a little disorienting. It's just trying to figure out who is speaking and who are they and their context here. So again, just make sure that you do that. This meeting has one purpose, and that is the workshop, as we've done historically, for presentation of the proposed 24-25 budget for the commission. And we'll ask both Tracy Gottwalt, who is our Chief Financial Officer here, and Dr. Mary Robinson with Petrol to make those presentations, right? So we're ready to begin. Tracy, you want to do the presentation, and then we'll engage in conversation here with the commission and answer questions in this workshop. Okay, Tracy?
Morning, Secretary and Commissioners. I'd like to start out with the proposed Horse Racing Commission budget. Just to go over some general layout of the budget, we have the 21-22 actual, the 22-23 actual expenditures for the year, the budget for 23-24, and then the proposed budget request for 24-25. We're here only to focus on 24-25. Those other 3 years are there as a reference, and we're used to help determine what we're proposing for the 24-25. Just a reminder in regards to the commission, that me, yeah. Okay. The revenue that supports the commission as far as its expenditures and is part of the financial statements that we present monthly is the pari-mutuel taxes, licensing fees, fines, and penalties. And that is the money that comes in to support the commission. Beginning with personnel expenses or services, we have that budgeted at $6 million. That's an increase of $650,000. That's based upon the proposed union contract for the 23-24 and future years. Travel and training was bumped up to $65,000 to be in line with what was actually experienced in 22-23, which is an increase of $20,000. Telecommunication was flatlined at $70,000. IT was bumped up to $575,000 to be in line with the actual expenditures of 22-23, which is an increase of $175,000 from the current year budget. Legal fees, again, we bumped those up slightly for increased costs for 24-25 to $20,000, and that's an increase of $8,000. Specialized services, just a reminder, that's the Commonwealth-wide charges that come from the Office of Administration. We increased those to $100,000, which is $25,000 increase from the current year. Other specialized services, which is the background checks, primarily for the commission. We increased those to 20,000 to be more in line with what the actual was for 22-23, which is an increase of approximately $17,000. Professional services not specified, that came in a little over 55,000 this year. So we increased it in 24-25 to 60,000, which is an increase of 35,000. Medical, mental, and dental, we flatlined that at the 10,000 that it is currently. Vehicles, we increased that to reflect what was the actual for 22-23 to about 10,000, which is an increase of 8,000. Just a reminder, the vehicles not only include it's the fuel and the repairs and such. So that with post-COVID, we're seeing a lot of increase in that cost. So the increase is probably somewhat needed there. So office equipment and supplies, we left that flatlined at 70,000. Other equipment, rental, leases, and supplies, we left that flatlined at 5,000. Publications and subscriptions, we just bumped that up to an even 2,000, which is a $500 increase. Miscellaneous, we flatlined at 3,000. Postage and freight, we bumped up to 25,000, which is an increase of 5,000, mostly driven by the fee increases for postage. Printing, again, we just left it flatlined at 2,000. Membership dues, we increased to 2,000 because of the actual expenses incurred in 22-23. Conference expenses, we increased to 5,000, which is an increase of 2 over the current year, again, based upon what was actually incurred in 22-23. Food, we have an increase there to 12,000, which is a $4,500 increase. Again, the vendor is determined in-house, and the prices have increased. So that was modified accordingly. Insurance, surety, and fidelity bonds, we took from 3,000 to 5,000. That's a Commonwealth-wide billing that we have not been allocating, but we'll be starting to allocate again. So we bumped that up accordingly. Other operational expenses, which is actually the treasury, we bumped that up to 30,000 based upon the actual incurred of 25,000 for this year, which is an increase of 10,000. Interfund reimbursement, which is our departmental admin billing, actually decreased 34,000 and went to 589, and that's based upon Office 365 licensing and IT allocations. So we went from estimates to actuals. This year was a change in what the Office of Administration was doing. So you see a decrease there. So looking at the change from the 23-24 budget to the proposed for 24-25, overall, it's a $930,000 increase. Questions?
Thank you, Tracy. Questions for Tracy on the horse race commission budget?
Tracy, this is Commissioner DeBunda. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning to you.
Morning.
Just for the edification, I understand it, but for the edification of those who aren't on this call all the time, would you explain what specialized services and interfund reimbursements are so everybody on this call understands what that means?
Sure. Specialized services are Commonwealth-wide charges. Usually the Office of Administration bills the department for charges for IT, HR, anything personnel related. Trying to think what else. I mean, they're just
Legal fees.
So it's anything that is Commonwealth-wide that they distribute out to.
So that's based on a percentage, right, Tracy?
Correct. And it's based upon, then it's usually allocated out to the different bureaus If it's IT, it's based upon licenses. If it's HR related or anything else, it's based upon full-time equivalents and wage staff. So that's
our share of that for 24-25 is estimated to be $100,000, right?
correct. And it's also rent for this building.
Okay.
So
And interfund reimbursements?
is the departmental charges. That's for it'd be HR, IT, finance, communications, ledge, policy, the secretary's office, and legal. So they're the charges that are distributed throughout the department. Again, that's based upon either, if it's IT driven costs, they're based upon your Office 365 licenses. And then if it's personnel, or any other charge, it's based upon your full-time equivalents or your wage staff. So, racing makes out well there because there's a lot of wage staff and not as many full-time equivalents in that regard. But this, reduction of the 34,000 is directly related to, the Office 365 licenses and how they're, allocating the costs. Before it was based upon the number of assigned to the department. So when you flexed in and out, you had to leave a cushion. They now changed that method this last year to be the actual number that the department is utilizing. So it ends up being a savings.
Thank you, Tracy. You referred to the 23-24. That budget hopefully will be approved soon, but it's not yet been totally finalized. Is that correct?
Correct. I think there's
Okay.
still ongoing communication with that.
All right, thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, the 23-24 budget is what was approved last year by the commission,
Yeah, but-
which is there for referencing. So that, like I said, there are ongoing discussions, but that's just there for a reference point at this time.
Thank you.
Mr.
Could
Rogers?
I ask Tracy, it's Commissioner Jones here. I would like to ask Tracy to illuminate slightly on the IT charges, because that's our biggest number in terms of an increase. And I'd like to have a little more information on that, Tracy.
The IT, if you recall, there's one individual, Mark Whalen, who does your IT consulting services. It was determined that during 23-24, another individual brought in to learn how to mark, so that if he, God forbid, got hit by a bus, somebody else would know what's going on because he is the only individual. There also was a business analyst person brought in, which is now required by all IT consultants to have a business analyst, which is a part-time position in this regard. In addition, there was refresh dollars for IT computers. So you see that jumped from 241 in 21-22 to 23-24. I mean, 22-23 going up to 568. It's just a benchmark to say that that's probably where those costs are going to continue to come in. They might be slightly less, more around 500,000 if there is no IT refresh done. But that the determination was to leave it in line with the 568. So basically from one consulting position to 2.5 is the major reason for that increase.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Rogers?
Ed Rogers, I think we need to accentuate the fact that the budget request is for spending authority, not just what we expect to spend, but what we're allowed to spend. And we compare it, I don't think it's as good to compare it with the 23-24 budget as it is with the 2022-23 act. If we look at the numbers, the increase is about 537,000, which is about a 7.5% increase from the prior actual expenditures. So I think that's what we want to look at more than the comparison with the previous budget.
Yeah, and again, with that being said, the largest increase there is in personnel services, being driven by the proposed union contract. I'm not sure if it's been ratified, but, the budget is being done based upon that proposed, union contract.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Tom?
Just one point to note that Tracy mentions about the personnel and the union cost. This is the Commonwealth, not just simply racing or PDA. It is a Commonwealth negotiation that was done between AFSCME and the Commonwealth. So when they're talking about a new contract with cost raises as far as compensation, and then in addition, there were benefit increases paid by the Commonwealth for the employees, and there were smaller things, but this was not negotiated by PDA, the staff here, or whatever. It's on a Commonwealth basis.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments for the 24-25 proposed budget for the Horse Race Commission? Okay, we can come back to that, but let's go to Dr. Robinson. Sorry.
Do the test.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, you've got the testing.
Okay. Then moving on to the testing budget for the 24-25. Again, the testing component is funded by the carryover balance from the Act 114 distribution, that 50% that remains in the fund, in addition to a racehorse development fund transfer. So those are the two components that help pay for these costs. Looking at the 24-25, again, you're going to see an increase in personnel services to $5 million, which is a $628,000 increase, again, based upon the Commonwealth negotiated union contract. Training and travel, we increased that to reflect the actual for 22-23 to 80,000, which is an overall increase of 45,000 from the proposed 23-24 to 24-25. We flatlined the telecommunications at 35,000. In this case, IT, we decreased because that is a cost that's now being assumed by UPenn. So you'll see that went to zero, a decrease of 50,000. Legal services and fees increased it to reflect a little bit of an increase based upon the actual this year to 15,000, which was a $5,000 increase. Specialized services, again, this is the Commonwealth-wide charges. We put a decrease in there of 25,000, taking that to 50,000 based upon what was incurred this year. UPenn contract, you're seeing an increase of about $1,650,000. Again, Dr. Robinson will get into the explanation of that increase. Medical, mental, dental services, again, that was increased to reflect what was actually incurred in 22-23 to 275,000, which is an increase of 150,000. At this point, I think I'd like to also mention, if you remember last year, when we were establishing our budget, we had to go back and modify it in December, and a lot of the lines were reduced substantially. So some of those reductions are going to be showing here in the fact that we're increasing them back up to an appropriate spending authority for 24-25. So again, that's 150,000. Contracted services, you're going to see an increase of 175,000, coming in at 225,000 for 24-25, and that again was based upon the actuals for 22-23. Real estate was again bumped to 375 based upon the actual for 22-23, which is an overall increase of 25,000. In regards to vehicles, there we flatlined it because of a margin, so that remained at 45,000. Office supplies, and equipment. We bumped that up to reflect the actual for 22-23 with a slight increase to 15,000, which was overall $7,000 increase from this year's proposed. Other equipment, rental, leases, and supplies, we had zeroed that out last year and went back and put 15,000 in to reflect what was actually incurred for 22-23. Publications and subscriptions, that line continues to be zeroed out. Miscellaneous, we flatlined at $1,000. Laboratory supplies, we saw a substantial, this is another item that was reduced when we did the 23-24 budget to get into the spending authority that we were required to have. We bumped it to 400,000, which is what we actually incurred for 22-23. So look, it's an increase of 250,000 for the 24-25 period. Postage, we flatlined that at 125,000. Printing, we flatlined at 5,000. Membership dues, we increased slightly to 45,000 based upon the 22-23 expenditures. Conference expenses, we again flatlined at 2,000. Wearing apparel, we increased to 10,000 based upon the actuals for 22-23, which is an increase of 3,000. So that takes the overall operating dollars to an increase of $2,253,000. Of course, the largest component of that is the UPenn contract. And then the interfund reimbursement, which is the departmental admin billing, followed suit with what it did with the commission and decreased 36,000 for the 24-25, so 613,000. That brings the overall increase in the budget from the 23-24 to the 24-25 of $2,845,000. And again, 2.2 million of that is going to be the personnel and UPenn.
Question. Can you give us the number that we originally approved for the 23-24 budget or not?
I do
I
not
can.
have that with me.
I
Do you,
can.
Tom?
In response to Commissioner,
Sorry.
in response to Commissioner Rogers' question, back in September of 2022, this commission approved $14,161,000.
Thank you. I'm sorry. It says push that way. How can it be upside down?
Commissioner Rogers, you're normal.
I'm sorry.
Everybody does that.
What are the membership dues? Is that RSI and?
Those membership dues are largely associated with UPenn.
We're getting a puzzle book
A puzzle,
from Dr. Robinson.
If I may be so, if I
Maybe
could,
I-
Trace,
maybe
the
I'm,
the membership dues that you have in question deal with our site, RMTC, USTA, and a couple smallers, but that makes up the membership dues of $45,000.
Okay, other questions for Tracy?
Commissioner Brenizer.
Yes, please.
lab supplies for the testing at Petrol are paid by UPenn. These are the lab supplies for the tracks, which were substantially higher than in previous years.
Reason I asked, there was a pretty good increase versus 23-24.
Again, that was a line that we cut back. If you remember, we were the UPenn contract went into effect last, fall. Was it
April of 22.
April 22? So when we were setting this budget, we weren't really sure how far down we had never really split out those costs before. They were UPenn supplies and racetrack supplies. So, again, I think laboratory supplies increased radically, but the ones that you're seeing for 22, 23 are only for the racetracks. And I believe the estimate for the 23, 24 budget was much lower than what it should have been. Again, trying to get within the spending authority.
I see that. If you go back and compare 21, 22 and 22, 23, they pretty well correspond now with the current figure. So, yeah, I think we were pretty light in in that period, 23, 24.
Okay, thank you. Let's do Dr. Robinson, right? Let's
Now,
talk about.
Can I ask Stacy, I'm sorry, one more question?
Sure.
We used to use as the Commissioner Rogers said, this is a spending authority, not actual going back these to the budget for what we're requesting today. So we used to have a spending authority of under 11 million, between 10 and 11 million. I forget the exact number. It was 10 million, 6 something. So this change would have what impact on the actual cost as you understand it?
I think what you're referring to is the 10,000,066 is the actual Racehorse Development Fund transfer.
Yep.
So that 10 million, which had been flatlined for several years, would have got added to the carryover dollars. So, and then the spending authority was established accordingly. The 24-25 proposed would require an increase in that Racehorse Development Fund transfer.
Is that about 3 million? Is a quick look at this?
We have not done the financial statement. We will be doing the financial statement as soon as it's done. But yeah, I would guess it's about a little under 3 million that would change, or approximately 3 million.
Okay. When you say transfer, that would come out of the Racehorse Development Fund, right?
Correct. The transfer would increase.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Robinson?
If I may, before you start, I'm sorry. He said, and you agreed, $3 million additional out of the Racehorse Development Fund. What is the amount of the carryover we're anticipating for this coming year? Or not this coming year, but
Right now,
the one that has not been transferred yet?
the one that has not been transferred
Right.
is 1.5, 3 million.
3, I think it's 3.
So there's roughly 3 million that will remain in the fund this year. So it gets, yeah, so
Let me
I think that's your time.
let me try to answer your question.
Well, I don't think we need the additional 3 is what I'm saying.
Well, it depends. 23 and 24 are intertwined with 24 and 25.
Oh, okay.
If in fact you keep spending authority where it is for 23, 24, there is going to be a carryover of a couple $1 million. If you raise the spending authority for 23, 24 to get to what this commission approved in September of 2022, you're going to go pretty much straight forward with a zero balance.
Okay.
So that's where in 24, 25, the fiscal code may need to be adjusted, or will need to be adjusted, actually.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. The fiscal year 23-24 was impacted significantly by the addition of the testing for HISA HIWU. So the majority of that 1.6 approximate increase that is being requested is due to the addition of the HISA HIWU regulations and the additional tests that we are performing to meet those regulations. In addition to that, there was also an observed actual increase in approximately 30% supply costs when we compare fiscal year 22-23 to fiscal year 23-24. So if you look at the budget that you've been provided, which includes the revised numbers for fiscal year 23-24, operational expenses increase. The request is an increase of about 30%. And the request for the personnel expenses is also about 30%. The 30% increase in personnel is due to the addition of 6 new positions to be able to meet the additional testing requirements. We added 4 new sample preparation methods, as well as 4 new analytical tests to be run on every sample. We had the technology to run these tests in the past, and we were running those tests in the past on graded stakes samples, but we were not able to run all of those tests on every post-race sample historically. HISA HIWU requires us to run all of those tests on every post-race sample. So we've approximately doubled the number of tests that we're running on all post-race samples. That is why I requested an increase in 6 additional personnel to be able to meet those requirements. Hiring has been difficult. I've been able to fill 2 of those 6 positions. There are 4 outstanding positions to be filled. And in the meantime, I really cannot thank my staff enough because they are all working overtime. They are coming in pretty much every weekend to be able to meet the requirements that we were asked to meet because they care about their work just like I do. The overtime hours that I've seen them put in for May, June, July, August, and September are supportive of the request for the 6 full-time positions to meet the HISA requirements. If we can do it with fewer people, we will, absolutely. To be honest, we are bursting at the seams in that building. I do not have desk space for everybody that works there. They all have their own laptops and they find a space to work wherever they can. And sometimes they work at home as well. So if we can do it with fewer people, we absolutely will. But at least based on the number of overtime hours that my current staff are putting in, I would like to request respectfully that we have the budget authority to hire 6 people if needed. It's been a push. And in addition to those 4 new tests that we're running on every post-race sample, the number of TCO2 samples that we're running went up dramatically. In the past years, we've run about 150 at New Bolton Center for the thoroughbred racing. Now we are running about 3,000 for the same time period. So that's another dramatic increase in the number of TCO2 samples that we're running at New Bolton Center. And in addition to that, there are some additional tests that we've developed for fatalities. So hair testing is being performed now on every fatality, as well as another new method that we needed to develop specifically for the requirements for fatality testing. Because of all of these increases, that is why the budget went up as much as it did. And these are carried over. So you're looking at fiscal year 24-25, but these actual increases have been incurred for fiscal year 23-24 as well. And I am hoping that the 24-25 increase will not even closely approximate what we saw in 23-24. I've budgeted between the revised 23-24 budget and the 24-25 is an approximate 3% increase. So my goal is to hope, and I hope that things will stabilize across both supplies as well as personnel. One additional thing I want to mention about the revised budget is that in order to meet the new testing requirements for HISA HIWU, there was an equipment purchase that was moved up from 23-24 into 22-23. And so that's why you see $500,000 decrease in the equipment line for 23-24 in the revised budget. That was essential. We needed that instrument in order to be able to run all of the tests that we needed to run for the HISA HIWU requirements. One last thing I want to mention, as you heard with the salary adjustments based on the union contracts being renegotiated, the university has also had some changes that were university-wide for salaries. So in December of 2022, the medical school made a move to change all of their research specialist salaries to be more competitive with the local hiring environment. And the veterinary school followed suit effective July 1st of 2023. And so those were salary increases that were basically the compensation office at the university put across the board for all the research specialists. Now, my lab employs primarily research specialists, and so those were included for my employees as well. I also asked them to look specifically for chemists, for analytical chemists, because we employ analytical chemists to do the work that we do for equine drug testing. When they made that additional look, they did see the analytical chemists in our area actually make a little bit more than research specialists. It was about a 6% increase over what the research specialists that they are making at the university. So they added an additional job title to the workflow just for our laboratory of analytical chemists so that I could appropriately hire into those positions. And that is primarily why I still have 4 open positions. That change wasn't made until recently. And I had several people decline offers that I had made to them previously because they just were not competitive enough with the market. So I understand this has been quite a shock for all of us, the amount of the increase in these costs. And I'm here to answer any questions that you may still have regarding why there are these significant increases.
A question about the TCO2 tests, which we had gotten away from quite a bit. Have you found any results that we need to be concerned about? Or is that not a big dollar item that we're talking about, that additional test?
So the TCO2 testing, there have been a couple interesting results. I can't share specifics on that. As far as dollar item, we already have the instrument for that. It's really the person needed to run it. So it's a single person. It's not, I wouldn't say it's the brunt of that 1.6 million. It's a single technician.
Dr. Robinson, thank you. Thanks for the insight on this. We can certainly continue the questions. I think for the commission, we're challenged by the cost and the escalation of cost with HISA HIWU and trying to understand. We know what it is. We feel like it's a bit out of our control. We're sort of in the receiving end of they used to be 300 samples, now it's 3,000 samples as an example. And all of that translates to, somebody at the end of the day has got to be, in that lab, processing and doing the diagnostics. So we understand that. When you look at the HISA HIWU cost, I mean, inside the budget, what do you think? Is that the 1.6 million that the increase that we're seeing is primarily attributable to the HISA HIWU costs that are?
It is primarily due to the HISA HIWU costs. The salary adjustments that were made obviously are independent of that. And so I did break down the numbers for the personnel that we had prior to adding those 6 positions. And that was about an 18% increase for the people prior to hiring in the new positions. So there's been significant changes in the market as well that are contributing. And of the 1.6 million, that was around 450,000.
Thank you. Other questions?
May I ask a question? 2 questions?
Commissioner Devonta, just a moment. Commissioner Brenheiser had a question.
Sure.
I have a question. I forgot my pacemaker today, but you mentioned these salary increases.
So in average, there was about an 18% increase across all of the personnel. That's not to say that an individual received 18%. That's because we had a QA position that went from being the person who was in that position. We could not fill that position for 6 months. And the person who had previously filled that position went somewhere else and made double what they were making for us. And so in order to be able to fill that position, we had to increase significantly for that individual position. So on average, most people saw a 6% increase, most of my staff in the lab.
Another question. In other words, the 1.6 will be in addition to the increase that we get from HISA. Is that my calculations right, or?
No, I'll answer that. So all of these numbers were provided to Tom Chukas when he was negotiating with HISA. So we knew ahead of time that this was going to be a problem, and we needed the resources to be able to meet what they were asking us to do. And so all of the numbers, this 1.6 that you're seeing here, the thoroughbred portion, which is all the HISA HIWU costs, were included and provided to Tom as part of the negotiation with HISA HIWU for the credit. So if you see on the budget that I've provided where we split it up between thoroughbred and standard bred, we did not include any of the HISA HIWU associated costs under the standard bred number. We put them all under the thoroughbred number. The only costs that are included under the standard bred number are the increased costs for people who were in the lab that had those salary adjustments. So there is an increase to the standard bred numbers as well. However, the majority of that increase is to the amount that we've listed here in the thoroughbred number as a result of the HISA HIWU transition.
Thank you.
Commissioner DeBunda? You muted him? Commissioner DeBunda, just unmute yourself, please. Can you do that? Okay, there you go.
Dr. Robinson. This the question that doesn't have actually anything to do with the numbers. We're doing more tests now because of the HISA. Are we showing higher positive results, or are we just doing the test, in your opinion? Are we getting more results, as I'm saying, because we're spending more money?
So I can't comment on the actual test results. I believe those are made publicly available by HIWU after they've been adjudicated, but I don't know the answer to that, or at least I can't comment specifically on what we're finding.
Tom, do you have a comment on that?
Like
I'm not looking for a particular person. Are we showing is doing more tests giving us, are we spending our money to do those more tests? Are we getting more positives, or are we just about where we were, in your opinion?
In certain areas, you're getting less. In certain areas with the therapeutics and the controlled medications, I don't see an increase. I see an increase in what I would call the banned or prohibited substances. And I'm going to make a comment that HISA and HIWU have determined that their assessment of a contamination in the stall or in the horse is solely equated to plant or feed. They do not consider up to this point any human, whether it's legal or illegal, an analytical finding of that. They consider that a drug positive. You've seen increases, considerable increases for methamphetamine, fentanyl, and those kind of drugs. You see a huge increase. And to be perfectly frank, the commission, through an investigation and analysis with Dr. Robinson and our own staff, we tend to find most of those are human-based. So that's where you see the increase with them. With HISA and HIWU, at this point, they're prosecuting them.
Now, we have a contract coming up. Are these increased costs, you said you already knew them, Dr. Robinson, or are you negotiating those as part of the new contract with HISA?
So I've not done any of the direct negotiation with HISA HIWU. However, I did supply these numbers, not these particular numbers for the fiscal year, but we came up with an estimate of the increased costs for March through December for Tom for the original negotiation. And that's where these numbers, when you project them out to the fiscal year, that's where these numbers came from.
Let me refresh everyone's mind here just for a minute, and exactly how HISA and HIWU work. At some point, they create an assessment for every state. They tell the state X amount of dollars are to your state, and there are two significant pieces of that. One is track safety, and the other piece deals with testing and the lab expenses. Okay. And what they suggested, and I'll use last year for an analysis. Last year, I think it was approximately $6 million that Pennsylvania was assessed. Okay, 1.2 was approximately the assessment for racetrack safety, which those funds cannot come out of the Racehorse Development Trust Fund. There was another $4.8 million approximately that was their belief. I would suggest what testing, test barn, the vets, the lab, and all the associated costs would cost. If the commission stepped down, that $4.8 million would be assessed to the racetracks and to the horsemen. What happened is the staff here did an assessment on what the test barn, the vets, and all those associated costs were. Dr. Robinson projected out with some projection, I would call it, what her costs would be. We sat down with HISA and said, look, if we're going to do this, you can't charge the horsemen and the track $4.8 million. We're doing the work. So that's where all the credits come. So just so I'm clear, I don't want anybody to think HISA or HIWU pays any money to the commission, to the tracks, to the horsemen. These are simple credits that by us doing the work with the commission people as livestock workers and vets, so on, and our contract with Dr. Robinson and UPenn, that makes it so hopefully the only assessment to the tracks and the thoroughbred horsemen are whatever it is on the racetrack safety side. Commissioner DeBunda, does that help explain it?
I asked that question because I wanted the other people on this call that I knew that answer already. Dr. Robinson, I have one last question for you. A couple of years ago, when we talked about research, you explained not in specifics, but the general kind of research you were doing. Given the amount of money that's being spent on research, is there a general list that we can get to see of what the research is done? And I think you also said at the time we had that discussion, it was right after COVID, that everybody was participating in some way in research. Is that still true? And are they being paid in that vein? So I'm looking at the research costs you have on your budget.
Sure. Yeah. So the first question about if you can get a list, absolutely. I believe last I spoke with Tom, we were planning to provide a research update at the October public meeting. So I am prepared. I am preparing for that to give you a list of all of the research since my last report. And then as far as the research costs go, I do have it divided up into research and drug testing at the bottom of the budget that you've been provided. And so we only have 3.25 people in the lab that are focused solely on research. If you look under the personnel lines, there's 3.25 people. And one of those people, the 0.25 is for a postdoc who is 75% of her salary is funded by a fellowship grant that she obtained from the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium. The commission is graciously providing the other 0.25% of her. And there are 3 other people that are solely doing research. The remaining people in the lab, the drug testing and research line shows that we had 9 people that were doing both. That's increased to 10, primarily because I took one of my people who was doing part-time research and made them full-time, and they are now doing both drug testing and research. And then under the drug testing positions, those people are all doing drug testing. They don't have time for research anymore. When we shut down for COVID for 3 months, I believe it was March, April, May, June 8th is when we got back in the laboratory. All of the people who were doing forensics work and drug testing resumed doing full-time drug testing at that point. So we used that period to try and keep them busy and doing the research and contributing to the research mission during COVID because of just the situation at hand. However, they have all now resumed only doing forensic drug testing. And so does that answer your question as far as the personnel costs for
yes,
research?
it does. Yeah, I do want better. I remember that was the last time we had this discussion, was during the COVID, that I recall. So thank you for your answer.
Sure.
Thank you. Other questions from the
And this
commission
is a
member?
tough question. You know, you mentioned all the extra work and all the extra procedures you have to go now based on the requirements of HIRU and HISA. What result do you think we're going to see from this extra expenditure?
So it's certainly increasing the number of substances that we're testing for in the post-race samples. As Tom mentioned, he's seen an increase in the number of banned findings at the track. And I can't, refer to anything specifically, but I mean, the more drugs that we can test for, the better likelihood we have of catching anybody who's using those drugs. So it has pushed us to try and be even more efficient as possible. And I think in the end, I mean, we are going to be holding the entire industry to a higher standard for drug testing purposes.
You mentioned the additional drugs that you're going to be able to test for. Are these situations that they're asking you to test for, or?
Yes, there's a list that we have to test for. And then there's a list that is also additional banned substances. And my understanding is the goal is to continue adding more drugs, as we always have. Now, my understanding is that it will not be as rapid as we have had to change in the past. And as I mentioned, we had many of these methods already. It's just that we were not using all of them at the volume that we are using them now. So we've had to incorporate, because of the different types of chemistry for different compounds, you have to do different preparation procedures and such. So at this point, we have 6 different sample preps for blood and 1 for urine, and we have 6 different analytical methods for blood and 1 for urine. So it's the increased number of different types of methods that we're running that allows us to increase and cover more drugs. So we were covering a lot of those drugs to begin with. However, with the increase in the number of methods that changes the chemistry, now we can cover even more. And so the hope is the push to get to this point was the hardest part. Now that we're covering all those different types of chemistry, other drugs that come along will most likely fit into one of those methods that we're already running. And so then it's a matter of adding that to the method, doing the QCs and the having a certified reference standard to make sure it's working properly, and then moving on. And so we should not see such a dramatic increase in the number of resources needed going forward.
Yeah, well, that was another question. In other words, since you've been testing under their new additional requirements, have you found any new drugs that have shown up?
Yes.
Other questions?
Yeah, Dr. Robinson, it's Commissioner Jones here. Do you have any feeling for where we are compared to other labs around the country? Are they doing as much as we are?
So I can only really obviously speak for our lab, and I don't want to share anything too widely. I do know that all of the HIWU labs have had to make similar adjustments. So based on the discussions that I've had with my colleagues, all of the labs that have become HISA HIWU labs and were approved to do the testing made similar adjustments to be able to meet the requirements.
Is it fair to say what we are doing is being done in a similar manner in the other jurisdictions?
In the, yes, in the labs that are using HISA HIWU and are overseen by them, yes, I think that is fair to say.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question as a follow-up for either probably Tracy or Tom. I was hoping George would have been here, but I forgot he had to leave early. If we approve this budget, how do we fund it?
Well, okay, I'll come back. I'll come back to what I said previously. If you leave 23, 24 alone with the spending authority, okay, then between the 3 million that's carried over from 22, 23 and the 10 million in the Racehorse Development Trust Fund, the transfer amount, that would be pretty close to what we need with some minor adjustments for 24, 25. If you leave 23, 24 alone and you don't do anything, if in fact, the fact of the matter, here's a better answer, Ed, here's a better answer. If you can raise the spending authority for 23, 24.
Tom, you're gonna
Okay.
be a good you're gonna be a good trainer after you're done. You have different answers for why you're lost. But keep
So
going.
let's play it out this way. Here's a better answer. If you can get the 23, 24 spending authority, the budget that you approved back in 23, in September of 22, okay, that will require the use of the $10 million fiscal code transfer for 23, 24, and it will require, I would suggest, almost all, if not all, of the carryover from 22, 23.
Right.
So now you head into 24, 25. Okay,
Problem.
you have a problem. The problem is you have right now the fiscal code has in the past 7, 8 years been $10 million and change, 10,066. You don't have that $3 million carryover. So there has to be an adjustment in 24, 25 to meet the spending authority on the revenue side. Is that helpful?
Yeah, and I would just say, but that's,
I don't think so.
The bottom line is this.
When we get to the end of 23, 24, if the spending authority has increased, we come up with zero balance.
Correct.
So I'm looking at 24, 25.
24,
All
20,
we have is 10 million, whatever, 66.
the fiscal code has to go up or another alternative source. One of two things.
How does the fiscal
Wait.
code go up?
No, wait a minute. We're looking at 24, 25 right now. That's what we're focusing on because I need to put in the department's budget request. 24, 25, we are going to put in our budget request an increase in the racehorse development transfer amount. Okay,
with a corresponding increase in request for spending authority.
correct.
So two parts to that, right? So at the end of the day, the budget you're submitting will take two actions, right? There's a transfer and there's an authority. That's what we will be asking for in this budget submission. That should reflect then everything you're seeing today, and we'll act on this afternoon is the actual budget we'll submit for 24, 25.
And then what we submit in a financial statement will show the increase in the transfer. And GBO is aware we're doing that, just so you know.
To be completely transparent, that's coming out Horseman money, is that correct?
Resource Development Fund,
Trust.
Trust Fund, I'm sorry.
So Tracy, that means that there will not only see a decrease in the money coming out for all the different breeds, but how does that affect the year-end extra money that we give? We keep some of that for the testing and some we give to the breeders. How will that be impacted?
Well, technically, the transfer that you're calculating should be covering the costs. The money that should be being distributed should be excess commission revenue. Now, if not everything is spent in the racehorse development transfer, that is also distributed. But I think the whole process here is to look at the beginning balance for the remaining amount plus the transfer to equal the spending authority. So we shouldn't be trying to calculate in your racehorse development transfer an excess amount to be distributed. It should be only what's left. for
I
the
was
commission.
just asking the impact. I wasn't trying to.
Yeah, there shouldn't be an impact. Yeah, there shouldn't be an impact. I mean, you would think that at this point, if the commission's not making up the deficit, then the commission funding would be more to be distributed. But with that being said, the trend is decrease in revenue. So, I mean, that's part of the whole ongoing scenario with the transfer and the Act 114 distribution. So theoretically, if revenue stays the same and we get an increase in the Racehorse Development Fund transfer, the distribution at the end of the year should be more. But that's considering everything being steady.
Yeah, we have a
Thank you.
question.
Yes, Todd Mosstoller. It's TODD-MOSTOLLER. I'm Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Horsemen's Benevolent and Protective Association. Dr. Robinson, how many labs in the country are currently being utilized by HIWU?
6.
What other jurisdictions, how many jurisdictions do you test for?
Pennsylvania.
So all samples that come and you do no other testing for any other state?
To be honest, I don't know, because sometimes they send us samples that we don't know where they originated from.
Let me, we get credit for that.
Yes.
We don't absorb that cost.
Okay, but how's that credit reflected if they do test other jurisdictions?
At the end of the year, when we sit down to do the balance with HISA, HIWU, I get monthly reports from Mary on whatever they, or from the lab, whatever they do for any outside jurisdiction, and then we'll settle up at the end of the year.
Okay, so these numbers reflect no testing done in any other jurisdictions?
No.
Okay.
My name is Bob Reber, B-O-B, R-E-B-E-R. I'm General Counsel for the Pennsylvania Harness Horsemen's Association. Tracy, let me ask you a question. Is there any general appropriation at all out of the general fund to supplement the testing costs at all? Every penny comes out of the Horse Race Development Trust Fund, is that correct?
Not every penny, some of it is leftover commission dollars. I mean, some of it is leftover funding that is brought into the commission as far as.
Oh, no, that's, you're talking about the carryover and the,
Right,
and those type of things, parimutuel tax, et cetera.
correct.
But again, that's a specialized,
Racing,
yeah, okay.
it's all racing.
There's a lot of things going on in the General Assembly right now relative to the whole overall gaming situation with skill games and things of that nature. And there's been a number of Senate hearings already on that. And is there any possibility that out of that particular exercise, there has been any consideration to formulate any kind of appropriation from that funding mechanism if and when it becomes regulated? Has there been any talk about that at all?
I'm gonna have to defer to the secretary. That's out of the realm of agriculture and I am not involved in
No.
that.
Now, let me ask you this. Is there any dollars that are appropriated under the general fund appropriations to the Department of Agriculture that are being used for any of these testing costs? Or again, is it still just strictly the Racehorse Development Trust Fund dollars?
No, at this point, no, there's none.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, Dr. Robinson? On her portion, or Tracy? If not, you have before you, again, the 24-25 proposed budgets. Tracy and Dr. Robinson have walked through that. We'll take no action at this session. The official action will be this afternoon at 2 o'clock for a special meeting to approve what you have before you for 24-25. I'll say it again this afternoon, but this budget then will be submitted. We did, by the way, get an extension to preparation of this budget at the request of the commission that was granted, and further discussions are occurring relative to 23-24, which has been mentioned here today, as well as the future actions that'll be required to effectuate the 24-25 budget by the governor's budget office. So we'll do our best to advocate for what the needs are. I think everyone here now understands the evolving nature of HISA and HIWU. That is even under our best estimation last year of things that were not clear. They were speculated to what extent the HISA HIWU cost would impact us. I think we now are further into this and have a pretty good idea. I am hopeful that, as Dr. Robinson notes, that the developmental work on the chemistry and the samples and the analytical work, it gives us some, but will not be at the same pace it's been, right? And I am hopeful, we all are hopeful that that's the case. What I think is uncertain, of course, is just the volume of tests, right? We don't know to what extent HISA and HIWU sets forth requirements for each of the participating labs, and then you have to respond to that. It's not like you can opt in and out of that conversation, and I think that's part of the challenge, coupled with, to Dr. Robinson's point, I mean, finding the folks with the requisite skills and competencies to work in these labs at the salaries we're paying, that is a universal issue, right? We've got it in our lab here. We've Penn State last week in the Animal Health Diagnostic Commission had a similar conversation. It's really challenging, right? So hopefully the work lines up with the skill and the competencies. That's a work in progress for Dr. Robinson. But they're the factors inside of HISA and HIWU that are shaping this budget. And we have, as part of this journey of explaining both the 23-24 as well as the proposed budget to the budget office, there are a lot of folks we've got to bring with us in understanding what HISA and HIWU is and the implications on a state, right? Because we have been historically pretty good at being able to estimate future costs, right? They were within our control. We had a sense what the contract provided for petrol, and we had a sense of rental rates and people and volumes, and now all of a sudden we find ourselves these things being dictated by somebody who doesn't report to us, right? They are being put forth as requirements for the state to meet the federal requirements. So it's a bit unsettling, and we know that. We field a lot of questions from, the commission and staff, tracks and stakeholders, but also know that those who are working with us in the budget office and governor's office are asking similar questions about how do we do this? I mean, how do we fund it? How do we support it? So I give you that just for context, that these questions today are all fair, all reflective of what is happening. All of us feel some level of anxiety about just what those costs are and the escalation of costs that we've experienced, and wondering where does it stop, and to what extent you can absorb all of that inside the operating budgets, the spending authority, the requests, and to what extent, if any, supplemental funds to all of that are required, right? And I just put that out. And we're still trying to work it. So it's a work in progress. I appreciate the exchange and insight today. I appreciate Dr. Robinson and Tracy providing that, helping us better understand what the costs are, the everyday challenges that particularly Dr. Robinson has to make this work within both at the macro level with HISA and HIWU and what the state's expected, but the micro level just of a lab. I mean, where do you put people? What are they assigned to? And how do you retain them if they're with you? And then, of course, the developmental chemistry, that's not the easiest thing to do. And just to put a footnote to that, it is another place where costs of HISA and HIWU show up, is that they have to develop that chemistry, right? It's not like you're given that work by somebody else. That's developmental, right? So that takes time and cost to do it. So unless there are final questions here, certainly ask them. Otherwise, we'll be able to reconvene this afternoon at 2:00. But I see a question.
When does our contract expire, our current contract expire with it?
12/31, December 31st of this year.
And we don't know what they're gonna assess us for next
The
year.
law stipulates that they have to make public the assessment by November 1st. I don't remember the exact date, but I think it was mid-October last year when they put it out, October 15th, October 18th, something like that. We're guessing probably in the next 10 days to 2 weeks, we should hear something.
How can we approve a contract if we don't know what our costs are gonna be on the future contract?
Well, the budget, there's a deadline to submit the budget right now. That's what Mary and Tracy have worked on. Okay, so we're submitting that. And remember that this is a key that Ed brought up before. What you're setting is spending authority. Okay, if you go back to past budgets, you set spending authority at a certain level, which allows us to spend up to that point. Perfect example, in 23 in testing, Commissioner Brent Heiser, we actually spent $11,955,000. That's what we spent then. The spending authority was over $13 million. So what you're setting up now is the spending authority. Staff, Tony and myself, in conjunction with Dr. Robinson and Tracy, try never to reach that. We try to stay well under that. So that's what you're doing here right now.
And another question, being that the standardbreds are not part of this program, are your testing procedures being, for the standardbreds, are they being used as they currently exist? Or?
The test that, when the chemistries, it depends on the test. For the test where the chemistry is the same as what we need to use for the standardbreds, and it was easy to add in the additional substances required, we are using the same test. So yes, the standardbreds are, additional drugs are being added to the tests that are being run on the standard. Additional drugs are being added to the tests that are also run on the standardbred samples.
And are those charges being charged to our?
So these thoroughbred and standardbred costs that you see here in the budget that I presented, it is somewhat of an arbitrary number. It was based on total sample numbers received. So we receive about 60% of the samples are standardbred samples and 40% are thoroughbred samples. And so for the vast majority of the costs, we divide them up based on the number of samples received. 60% assigned to standardbred, 40% assigned to thoroughbred. For the HISA HIWU specific costs, the addition of the 6 people, and the addition of some of the supply costs for running increased tests, those were all assigned to the thoroughbred line. It is somewhat arbitrary. It's the best that I could figure out how to divide it up.
Okay, don't see other hands, screen or room. So we'll adjourn here. We'll reconvene at 2:00 for the special meeting. Different number, of course, when you call into that. And that purpose will be specifically for the approval of the 24-25 proposed budget. That was the focus here for this work session. Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.